What's up guys, it's Nick here at Fantasy Forge Miniatures, and today I'm going to be showing you how to finish your miniature tree. So we've got our trunk built, baked, ready for paint, and put that canopy on. So let's get crafted.
All right, now when your tree is fully cooled down from cooking in the oven, it's time to start painting. So I'm gonna use the same parchment that I baked it on to act as my palette. I'm gonna start off with some folk art, real brown. It's a nicer, darker brown. What I like to do is start with a darker coat and then just bring out all the highlights using dry brushing. And I'll show you more what I mean. So we're gonna start off with some real brown. Alright, and once it's fully covered, we're going to want to let it dry for a little bit before we add our second coat. Now that we have a nice dark brown base coat, it's time to start highlighting. Let's grab some Coffee Latte by Folkart, and you're going to want to make sure that anything you paint this with is matte. So right here you can see matte acrylic paint. You're going to want to make sure it's matte because there's no such thing as a high gloss tree unless you want it to look wet. Anyway, so we're going to start dry brushing with this lighter brown to start bringing out the highlights of the tree. So what you're going to want to do is load your brush up like this, get a lot in there, take just a paper towel, and you're just going to brush off a lot of the excess. Now we're going to start dry brushing perpendicular to the grain of the tree so that only the high points catch the paint. Now you can play with this a little bit. This is a pretty dry brushing, and I actually might want to get a little bit more on there right off the hop. But as you can see, we're already starting to pick up all that great texture that we sculpted in there. Alright, and there we go. As you can see, all that great texture is really starting to pop out now. So what I like to do after this is I'll go for a really highlighting finish. So I'll go in with a real white, or in this case, we're going to be using vintage white. So it's a little bit of an off-white. And I'm just going to lightly go over some areas where the sun would be hitting the tree. So on the tops of the roots, a little bit in the tops of the branches here, just kind of where the light would go, just to add a little more pop. Because after this, we're going to get to the wash, which is going to bring everything down a little bit and make it a little more organic and, you know, maybe more like a dirty, well, not a dirty tree, but more of an outdoor tree. Put a little bit of white. And I'm okay with using it directly from this color to this color because I don't mind if the white is toned down a little bit because I don't want really high titanium white. So I'm going to load up the brush, and I'm going to brush off a lot of this time. I only want a little bit to catch on the highlights. Now what you can do here is you can see I'm running my brush this way, and this is a technique for just catching specific highlights. So if I want it right on this one root here, I'll just brush sideways. And so that way, if I'm pulling across this way, I'm catching all the highlights, but if I brush this way, you'll notice that the bristles aren't able to go right into the details, so I'm only catching the highlights, and I'm running it this way so it only catches the one edge, because if I did it this way, it'd sink in. If I did it this way, it would go over all the edges, but this way I'm really singling out one highlight. All right, there we go. So now we got the texture really coming out in it. In some areas you may be like, oh, that's a little too much. You can play with that yourself. I like to have good exaggeration for readability on the table. It's gonna be time to give it a wash. Now, I've come up with kind of a formula, but you can buy them. I have some here by, the Army Painter dark washes. You can use those, but I find that will really eat up them quickly, so I like to create my own because they're really easy and cheap to make. I found these little bottles at the dollar store, a little spray gun, and I find it a really great way to the alternative brushing on. This is really great for just like covering large areas very quickly, and it actually saves on the amount of wash that you use. So in this case, I'm going to just leave it on this platform so that it has something. You can also like put it on top of your dry brush paper so that the excess wash that drips down, it will get soaked up by this. So this wash is actually just some Flow Aid. So Liquitex Flow Aid mixed with a little bit of just regular ink and some water and some black paint or brown paint if you'd like to have more of a warmer wash. So you can kind of play with the paint color that goes into it. And that's it. I just shake it together. I'm gonna work on maybe a different video that has like a specific formula. I know other great guys out there like Black Magic Craft really get into it and show you their formulas. But yeah, this is what I'll be using for this tree. So we're gonna go ahead and just, there we go, spray it on. You can be pretty liberal with this stuff so it really gets into the cracks, really exaggerates it. And there we go. So we're gonna let this dry, and then we're gonna come back to it to do a final highlighting. All right, now that the wash is fully dried, we can pick it up again, and you can see that the wash has seeped into all the cracks, the ink has dried in there, and really made the contrast between the highlights and the recesses. Now, one of the things I find when I'm doing this is the highlights have a lot of white and the contrast has a lot of black, so you start to get this kind of muted look. So what I like to do after I have done, my highlighting and my wash, I'll go one more pass with the dry brush and I'll pick kind of a medium color. In this case, I'm gonna be using Milk Chocolate by Americana. And just to nicely dry brush it over, warm it up a bit, and get that nice look. I'm gonna put a little bit out there. Dry brush it off. And then start warming this up. All right, and there we have it. Our tree trunk is completed. So now it's time to add some foliage. All right, now it's time to add some foliage. Now, there's multiple ways to do this, but for this one, I'm gonna be using Polyfiber Green by Woodland Scenics for the body of the foliage. And then I'm gonna be using Clump Foliage Light Green Woodland Scenics for the added texture on top. But in placement for that, you can use dollar store reindeer moss. I picked this up for $1, and you can use this for the body of the tree, and I'll have examples at the end of the video showing the different variations. And then for the added texture on top, I just have some colored sawdust here. Now I'll have a video on this later showing how I make this stuff, but it's a really great cheap way to make flocking. So it's just green paint, sawdust, and a coffee grinder. But these are alternatives to what I'm using today. But for now, I'm gonna be using the Woodland Scenics products. So what we're gonna wanna do is just grab a big old clump of polyfiber and just start pulling it apart a bit and giving it a bit of dimension. Now, this stuff has consistency of steel wool, so it's pretty rigid stuff. so it's good to just pull it apart to give it some body. And then I'm going to just start lying it on the branches. Now, for having them stick to the branches, what you can do is add just a little bit of crazy glue, or Aleene's fast grab tacky glue if you'd like. But what I like to do is actually just place the polyfiber right onto the branches, and it actually just kind of clings to it by itself. And why I like this is because it gives a lot of versatility to when you're laying it on there. You can kind of form how you want the tree to look, and you don't have that rigid stuck onto the branches. You can actually take it off and reposition it. And I'll show you examples of stuff that I have that I actually never glue right down, so that I can always just, for traveling or whatever reasons you want, you can actually just take off the foliage and then place it back on. So for now, I'm just going to be grabbing another chunk, pulling it apart, giving it some body, and then just starting to form the foliage on the tree. Now what I like to do is you can layer on top, and to kind of blend the two together, I just kind of rub them together, and the fibers kind of lock into each other and give it some more stability. And I like to just kind of use that method to bulk up some areas if I want to have a little bit more dimension. So I kind of have a hole here, so I'll just take a piece, give it some body, and then I'll just kind of lightly place it on top. I always like to have the branches kind of show through, because if you make a tree that just looks like a blob, it's not very interesting to look at, or even realistic. You want to be able to kind of see some of your branches kind of coming through there. So again, just rubbing them together and getting those fibers to interlock. Now, what I've done before on other trees is actually I'll create kind of a mesh of wire of thin wire, and I'll create a mesh that I'll put over top of it to create a canopy, which then I'll glue either the moss or the other flocking onto to create kind of a dome that goes on top. I don't need to with the polyfiber, but that is a method if you're working with something that's a little bit less rigid and would kind of flop or droop. So that is for sure another method for keeping your tree have a nice, full canopy. So the polyfiber has been added, and it already starts to look like a really nice full tree. And there you have it. We got our polyfiber on top, the body of our foliage on this tree, and it's looking pretty good. It actually looks all right as a tree already, but now we're going to add those details that are really going to make it come alive, which is the added flocking. So I'm gonna lay down some paper, because we're gonna start spraying this with adhesion to put our flocking on, and I don't want that getting all over my desk. All right, now that I got this piece of Bristol board down to block any adhesion getting all over my desk, I'm gonna grab some spray-on adhesion. I'm using Arlene's tacky spray. You can use Gorilla Grow tacky spray, whatever you'd like. There's spritzer bottles or whatever, but you're going to want to go with something that kind of sprays on, rather than something that you're going to have to brush, because there's going to be no stability to get the glue to stay on. So you're definitely going to want a spray adhesion, and go ahead and shake that up. And now we're just going to start lightly spraying the top of the tree. All right, and now I'm going to grab some of this clump foliage, and I'm just going to start breaking it apart a little bit in my hand here, and just starting to sprinkle, place it on, however you'd like. This stuff is really good for clinging into the polyfibers, because the polyfiber is kind of grippy in that steel brush type way, so it kind of grabs on in there. That's what you're going to do, just lightly sprinkle. And what's nice about having this paper underneath is if any foliage falls off, you don't have to waste it. You can just collect it afterwards rather than just vacuuming it up. Now you can just spray on a little bit wherever you need to. If you're finding that the glue is drying a little bit, you can just Spray a little on and continue sticking. And what you can do also is actually just tip the tree upside down, give it a couple of taps on the trunk, see what falls off. Looks like we're getting some pretty good adhesion on this one. So a couple bits fall off, you can just go in, tuck them back in nice and tight. And look at that! What a beautiful looking tree.
And that's it, guys. Now you know how to build your own tree. Go ahead, make your own variations of it. I love to see what you guys come up with. I've done a couple variations of my own here that I'll show you. This one here was my very first tree I built, and you can see I put a lot of texture into this one. I'm using lichen and some flocking that I got from a hobby store. This one here is made with the lichen moss and some Woodland Scenics clump foliage. And this guy here is that gnarly one that I said doesn't make a lot of anatomical sense, or doesn't have like a main root going into the ground. I had a lot of fun with this guy, making him look really gnarly and old. I imagine he'd be in a swamp, where he'd have to suspend the whole trunk so that it doesn't get too waterlogged. There's no wrong answers when you're making trees. It's your world. You build it how you want to. Alright guys, if you found this video helpful, hit the like button, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification if you want to stay up to date with all my videos. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and as always, keep on crafting.